Before we begin, thank you very much to Stars Cream for joining the Patreon campaign. It's nothing dirty. It's nothing dirty. Starscream has a new line of whipped topping for your desserts. That's it. Calm down. But thank you very much for the contribution. Thank you for the silly thing that might push it. Try not to do that in the future, please. Well, okay. So we do have star related stuff to discuss. I will admit that, because we got the news that the next Titan, according to computer listings, is going to be Star Convoy, or Star Optimus Prime as he's listed there, which I mentioned kind of changes a lot as far as the Titan size class goes, which is, not an understatement. We've imagined Titans this entire time to be these city formers, these gargantuan figures, right? That's what we're expecting, but Star Convoy is not that. Contrary to what a lot of people said in the comment section, no, he's not a city former. We're going to go over that here in a bit. But for starters, let's just kind of clarify, like, for those who are unfamiliar with Star Convoy and the period of Transformers he comes from, let's do just like a quick little history lesson for you. So at the time, this was late 80s, like 1990 at the latest, and at this time it was Takara depending on Hasbro to produce the toys. What Takara was doing, it starts off with Takara giving up Diaclone so Hasbro can make Transformers. When the line takes off, Hasbro takes charge and starts creating the brand new toys, and then those subsequently end up in Japan. So at the time, Hasbro was taking the lead on the franchise, and that meant that in the late 80s, in the late years of G1, the only thing that was really being made by Hasbro that Takara was interested in was the Micromasters. They didn't want Action Masters, go figure. But that meant that a lot of what Takara was doing on their own had to revolve around the play pattern. It was all large-scale Autobots for the most part, and those characters were all designed to integrate with the Micromaster play pattern. They all had base modes. All of them. And when I say all of them, I mean, at the time, they were very limited in large-scale Transformers and no villains. This was around the time of Transformers Zone, and then the return of Convoy / Battlestars, where, again, 3 figures, and that's it for, like, the large scale. And only Autobots, because villains don't sell as well. So Takara wasn't taking the risk on them. Battlestars is where we get to Star Convoy. And yeah, this was a pretty big deal toy at the time. Keep in mind, in Japan, Power Master Optimus Prime was Super Jinrai, a completely different character who happened to resemble Optimus Prime. This was the first time the original character had come back in Japan. And it's also the first time that Optimus and his trailer went from vehicle mode to robot mode without any kind of small robot or super mode in between. This was also a very gimmick-loaded figure. I mean, for starters, you had an additional trailer unit that fit in the back of the vehicle mode. Trailer unit could launch Micromasters with a spring-loaded ramp. You had a track. You had treads that were motorized to move backward or forward, which meant the vehicle could actually roll on its own, but they were also the heels of the robot, which meant the robot could also roll back and forth on its own. You also had the full base mode, which you see here, and we will fully admit the base mode is super lame. It's basically Optimus Prime doing the splits with his legs blown up, and then just kind of like holding a gun to make sure no one enters his torso. It's not great. It's not a great base mode at all. I don't consider this a city mode because nothing about it actually feels like a city. There's only a few ramps on the sides for Micromasters, but nothing for Minibots or larger Transformers. There's no towers. There's no faux windows. Like there's no like command post kind of thing. There's just, it's like calling Power Master Optimus Prime a city former. It's just a base, it's just a combat base. That's it. And it's kind of what this one is too. And it's not an impressive one. If this was like a base, it feels like a weird like tribute thing to Optimus Prime, with like his big big statuesque part in the middle that's just for Prime. So it's a weird one. It's a very weird figure. Now, of course, it's the final iteration of G1 Optimus Prime until you get into all the craziness that is the Takara G1 universe. It encompasses alternators / spinal tech, alternity, G2. It gets convoluted. Japanese fiction. But the toy itself is, it's not a bad choice here. Now, here's the thing. It is large, but I wouldn't call it city former large. So, toy-wise, yeah, he's about on scale with God Jinrai, as you can see here. Thank you, Sabertron.com, for this photo, by the way. It's hard to find good comparison shots. But this one does give you an example of just how big the original toy was. And we look at Super Jinrai there, or God Jinrai, rather, and we kind of go like, that is not a Titan. If they did Power Master Optimus Prime, you would absolutely expect him to be, at the most, a commander class. And then God Bomber would probably be like an individual leader figure that could combine onto him. And even if you put those two together, that still doesn't scream Titan, right? Like, there's not enough toy there to get to a $200 price point. So, scale is an issue here. And even if we go by fictional scale, admittedly, in the late G1 in Japan, the Autobot leaders were gigantic characters. Like here's Sty Atlas, who is about as big as Devastator. So we can get a sense of what the scale is. And again, it's not a scale you would associate with a Titan. We did have a Titan class, Devastator, but he's the smallest height-wise. He's the smallest of the Titans. And we have a brand new Studio Series Devastator coming out that is actually going to be proper scale and not nearly as huge. So we have that to fall back on. So scale-wise, we acknowledge Star Convoy, absolutely not Titan class on his own, typically. He's about the size of Star Saber, who we acknowledge, yeah, commander class, right? Now, this is where we get a little bit more interesting. Evan has actually been doing some podcasts lately, and he's been doing some interviews to kind of give us a little bit more behind the scenes. And one of the things that he mentioned during one of these interviews is Titans don't necessarily have to be gigantic. They are actually looking into the potential for smaller Titan class figures. And that raises a lot more potential, and that's kind of where Star Convoy comes in. But it also fixes a lot of problems we currently have with the Transformer distribution. For instance, someone pointed this out in my previous video, and it is a salient point. If we are getting Commander Class Silverbolt, followed by Commander Class Onslaught, as it does look like, the listings for Vortex and Swindle indicate Combaticons are next for the second year of age of the Primes. That does mean that the Commander class is going to be taken up for a long time by Combiner torsos. And if Hasbro continues down this track, that does potentially mean that we would be in line for a brand new Defensor, a brand new Abominus, a brand new Computron, all of which would require Commander class figures to be at the core. That does make this exceedingly difficult to figure out how to get certain characters out there. We had great success with things like Armada Optimus Prime, for instance. This one is a spectacular look at what a Commander class toy can be, when it's just an independent thing. And this would kind of solve that a little bit, because if we were to have done, for instance, if we were to do Optimus at this scale, at the Commander Optimus as a Titan, for instance, that does mean that we could have not only saved the space, but we could have had room in the budget to do something that is kind of sorely needed. So for instance, the big thing with Armada Optimus is when Jetfire. That's the hard part right now, because everyone kind of has the same question of like, when do you actually get, or how do you get a Jetfire out to actually get Optimus Prime's combined modes from Armada? You can't really do him as a leader because he's a triple changer, robot, vehicle, pants. Because of that, his engineering is going to be a lot more involved, so he'd fall under the Voyager Plus category of leader class figures, which is way too small to actually work for legs for Optimus. You'd have to make him commander class, but, when combiner torsos are taking up that slot, every year, how do you get it out there? There's no indication from Hasbro that they're going to move to 2 commanders a year, which would solve the issue. So how do you get Jetfire out? Or how do you get Overlord? How do you get Overload out? Because at least Jetfire has his own personality. You can release him as his own individual figure, and there's repaint potential there. Little bit of repaint potential, but still, it's there. Overload, not nearly as much. You got Energon Ultra Magnus, which is a weird version. You have no character backup. No one is in love with the character of Overload because he had none. He was a drone. So you have this very limited potential for these toys. Now, if the idea of smaller characters for Titans existed at the time, this could have been a whole multi-pack. You could have gotten all 3 in one box, spent $200, and had so much toy to play with as a result. You basically start looking at Titan class. The way you do is like Gen Selects, like Revenge of the Fallen, Devastator, where, okay, we'll just throw everything into one big box. Could have done it. So we could solve that problem of like all those little characters that would associate with what would normally be commanders, and we just do them all at once. It also kind of solves an issue we're having. So this screen cap taken from Jinxed here on YouTube, because again, comparison pictures hard to find. And I'm currently not able to take the photos myself. However, I wanted to show this just so, Titans are shrinking because budgets suck. Inflation sucks. So we do acknowledge that, like, with Titans going downhill, there is more room for them to be smaller characters now, potentially at a much smaller price point. Like if we do a smaller character, like if it's just Star Convoy on his own, I don't expect him to be $200 because he's nowhere near as complicated as Tidal Wave would be. He's just not. It would be absurd to actually go to that degree. And he's not supposed to be as big as Tidal Wave either. So if we shrink him down, keep the complexity about the same, just give him new engineering, new articulation, we should have something around the lines of like a $150 release. And even then, I think there's room to do some interesting things with him. For instance, Grandis. We know from other interviews that Takara's engineers want to do a brand new Grandis figure, but what do you do? How do you get a Grandis out there? Do you make him a Titan all on his own? Like, he's a big chungus guy, but, he's not an interesting toy. There's not a whole lot of playability you can get out of him. So then lies, like, what do you do with Grandis? Well, if Star Convoy is going to be a $200 figure, a $200 Titan, but still in scale with Generations, because let's remember, there is some importance to the scale of characters in Generations. They want your shelf of characters to look like it makes sense altogether. So it's not going to be gigantic. It's going to be about Commander class, meaning we have room. So that's how they could get Grandis out there. And Sky Gary as well, just to get the entire trio from Battlestars out at once. That's a potential. That could be how to actually do it. And I would absolutely welcome that. Because I genuinely don't think there's any other way you're going to get those characters sold unless you're packing them in with an Optimus Prime. So that is a potential. And because that is a potential, that also means that the characters from Zone also have potential. So you could do a Diatlas figure that is released beside Sonic Bomber and Roadfire. I know they did that in Legends as a special box set release, but they were all retools, and we know it was kind of like mashed together kind of, this doesn't really work, but we're kind of pretend it works kind of way. I would be all for a Titan class release of the trio that is completely done from the ground up. If that is possible. That is now possible. However, we could go on the basis of this is just to release smaller versions of Titans, so in which case maybe, somewhere in the 140, 150 range, somewhere that's kind of sensibly above Commander class, but still makes a little bit more sense. For instance, I think Energon Optimus Prime would be a boring Commander release on his own, because even if you improve his proportions and the engineering of the drones, you're still not going to get something that's really that satisfying. A lot of it comes down to the fact that his trailer does nothing, right? Trailer does absolutely nothing, so it's not a very fun package on its own. But as a Titan, where you can throw in Wing Saber, a toy that would die a death at retail because, it would be very limited in appeal, throw it in as part of the Titan class. Trailer, drones, Optimus, and a fully articulated, or as articulated as modern engineering would allow, Wing Saber. And again, you get a ton of playability this way. You get a lot of options. You get everything in one box, and you don't have to worry about going around and getting everything. Because let's be honest, Energon Optimus Prime really only reaches its full potential when you have both of these toys. So releasing them individually, it's going to be a hard sell. In one box, I'm down immediately. Especially if they do try to keep the scale consistent, which means this would be like a $150 Titan. That I would be absolutely down for. And we can apply that logic to a lot. My boy. We could do the exact same thing for Optimus Prime from Cybertron. And not only because, I think he'd be bigger and bulkier than, Armada or Energon Optimus Prime all on his own. But again, you could kit out the box. If you wanted to be like around the $150 scale, then you throw in Leo Breaker, or you throw in Cybertron Wing Saber. If you want the $200 box, you throw them both in, and then, just deck it out. So it's like a all-in-one set kind of thing. I'd be down for that in an instant. And again, it's not just the fact that Titan class budget would allow it to be big, but it would allow it to also be as complex as necessary. Galaxy Force Optimus Prime, Galaxy Convoy has a lot going on. So to be able to do it at a larger Titan scale and to throw in some of his companions along with it so you don't feel like you're missing out anything, that provides a lot of potential. So now we get into this realm of like big characters and their combiner components, which also brings us to things like Master Megatron and Galvatron from Galaxy Force, or Cybertron Megatron, whichever. And again, this is where you have Leo Breaker. You can repaint the Leo Breaker from last year's release and throw it in with a Megatron. Again, hit that like $150 price point, or maybe even less. Like, what else would you throw in for here for this Megatron to get it up to that price? Because Nemesis Breaker ain't gonna take a Commander class up by $60. You're gonna have to figure out something else. But you get my idea. It just blows the whole idea of what a Titan can be wide open to a lot of new possibilities. We can do smaller characters, and maybe it's just a little bit more expensive than Commander. Or maybe we throw in a whole bunch of other characters that go with them, and you just have a lot of fun in one box. It doesn't necessarily have to be a giant. It can just be loaded. And that doesn't necessarily mean we're cut off, Like, we still have these big chungus characters who have not gotten Titan class releases. Energon Omega Supreme. If you wanted to do as a Titan, okay, fine. I'd do that beside Energon Optimus as a Commander class and Wing Saber as a leader. And you might get away with that. Maybe. But there are also characters like Animated Omega Supreme that are still kind of waiting in the wings, and maybe not we get them someday. So those are the kind of things I hold out for. That just because Titan might do some smaller and even more affordable, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're cut off from the big guys, which means it could be either or. We could have both at once. And all options are on the table. Titan might end up being something where you would end up paying $150 for 1 year's Titan, and the next year it's a $250 because it's some gigantic chungus like Omega Supreme. I'm still in the market for an upgraded Metroplex that's more like the G1 design rather than the one they did during Generations. I'm still in the mindset of Fortress Maximus is terrible and needs another redo, and I would be down for Brave Maximus as a release as well. All that kind of goes through my head. So if we have all of those options on the table, it seems like, yeah, this is what Evan meant by we got plenty of things we can do with Titan still. I'm excited for it, and I really want to see exactly what they do with Star Convoy, because that will tell us exactly what Titans are going to be like in the future. But that's going to be a ways off. So for now, we speculate, we discuss, and that's what the comment section below is for. So, welcome to the new age of the Titan, when it can be just about anything. So, feel free to talk about it in the comments below, and as always, I will see you next time.